A very good morning to all of you and a warm welcome to our 8th Ring the Bell for Gender Equality event hosted here at the JSE. Today is such an exciting day, one of the most exciting on our calendar, because we join in with a number of other exchanges around the world as we look to what we need to do in gender equality and advancing the gender divide. Now, today, I would firstly like to say a very big thank you to our partners in this event, UN Women, UN Global Compact, Women in ETFs, the Sustainable Stock Exchanges Initiatives, the IFC, the CFA Society, the Motsepe Foundation, and of course, our long-standing partners, RMB. Today, we have a wonderful lineup for you, but before we start with that lineup, I would like to just look back and reflect on where we've come from in relation to gender equality over the last number of years. I think it stands without saying that there's a lot that still needs to be done. And notwithstanding South Africa's prevalence on the continent as being one of the most advanced in relation to gender equality, there's still a huge amount that needs to be done. There's also a huge amount that we need to unite on as a continent to be able to advance this agenda across the board. Unfortunately, as a result of the pandemic, the divide has worsened. But we stand at a precipice where we know now that if we don't make the changes that we need to make, unfortunately, it becomes more and more difficult in the future. The upside of that, of course, is that we have so many amazing women who stand ready to do this. And of course, a number of men that stand ready to support this cause and see that we cannot have a sustainable economy without having a significant part of that economy, a significant part of the population actually contribute to that. So our theme this year is gender equality today for a sustainable tomorrow. And when we look at sustainability in my role as Chief Sustainability Officer, the issue of gender is so entrenched and systemic across many of the sustainability challenges which we face. Just this year alone, the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report talked about social cohesion and mental stability actually being some of the biggest concerns that we have in relation to the global risks. Take this and multiply it by 10 in many instances for those challenges faced by women in relation to this. And we see that our work is cut out for us. But we also, again, are encouraged by the amazing women we have. And of course, the first amazing woman I would like to introduce you today to do the welcome address is none other than the JSE CEO, Dr. Leila Fourie. Leila, I hand over to you. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining me today as we ring the bell for gender equality. Back in the 1800s, American author Emma Lazarus coined the phrase that none of us are free until all of us are free. Martin Luther King popularized it further in the dream that he had. There is still so much that needs to be achieved for all of us to live that dream, especially here in South Africa. Inequality confronts us in many forms and to varying degrees, but today we are shining the light on gender. Despite the fact that women outnumber men in this country, the balance of power and opportunity remains skewed. We have done so much to change this. We have a globally celebrated constitution which protects the most vulnerable in our society. Our robust state institutions uphold, implement, and hold us all accountable to it. As it was being drafted, our founding father, Nelson Mandela, made sure that those entrusted with drawing it up would forever recognize the important role that women had played in the struggle against apartheid and the role that they continue to play now and in the future. He said, and I quote, "As a tribute to the legions of women who navigated the path of fighting for justice before us, we ought to imprint the supreme law of the land, firm principles upholding the rights of women." We've made great strides in shattering glass ceilings in the last 27 years. It's no longer surprising to see female CEOs, cabinet ministers, fighter pilots, miners or truck drivers, combat commanders, and airline captains. With each ceiling shattered, there is a young, ambitious girl looking ready to follow that example. We should be proud of every single one of them. But we must never forget that not all women are free. In many industries, women are still not equal when it comes to salary parity, employment rights, and opportunities. As for domestic responsibilities, women have always borne the lion's share. Today, as we ring this bell for gender equality, we pause to reflect on the role that women can play in our society if they are properly empowered. Most importantly, we must reflect on how business can create opportunities for women to climb the corporate rungs to the boardroom or to start their own companies. We can think about how women are vital to the creation of a prosperous and sustainable society in which everyone is equal in every way. In a country so desperately in need of economic growth, we simply cannot afford not to have all hands on deck. On that note, it's a great privilege for me to welcome the marvelous Busi Mavuso, who today will present our keynote address. As CEO of Business Leadership South Africa, she stands tall as an ambassador for women everywhere. She really is the true harvest of what is sowed when real talent meets opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Leila. And after those words, I think Busi Mavuso needs no further introduction. She is a face familiar to many of us and a powerful woman who has done so much already to advance gender equality, but also to just show leadership in business. Busi Mavuso, we hand over to you, the CEO of Business Leadership South Africa, to take us into our keynote address. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you very much, Shamila. Thank you to Leila, the CEO of the JSE, and my colleague at the BLSA board for the invitation for me to come and share my thoughts this morning on this International Women's Day. Today, I think, is a very critical day, not just for women, but for the world over. And today we join the UN Women in the world in coming together under the theme, Gender Equality for a Sustainable Tomorrow, a call for climate action for women by women. And the theme really seeks to draw a vital link between gender, social equity, and climate change. And it recognizes that without gender equality today, a sustainable future and an equal future remains out of reach. The theme also seeks to bring to the spotlight that women and girls experience the greatest impact of the climate crisis as it amplifies existing gender inequalities, which put women's lives and livelihoods at risk. Across the world, women depend on, yet have less access to, natural resources and often bear a disproportionate responsibility for securing food and water. And to this end, the UN Women on this International Women's Day are calling for policy and social reforms that put gender equality and sustainability at the center of progress. And they highlight 5 key ways to drive change, one of which is the call to support women's leadership, acknowledging that at both the national and community level, women's representation and leadership appear to drive better environmental outcomes. They cite that countries with higher percentages of women in parliament tend to adopt stricter climate change policies, resulting in lower emissions, and that at the local level, women's participation in managing natural resources lead to more equitable and inclusive resource governance and better conservation outcomes. So this focus area by the UN Women and the call to support women's leadership is where I would like to focus my conversation with you this morning. You know, one of the interesting observations during this COVID crisis, at least for me, has been how this pandemic has been an enormous test of leadership. where urgent and decisive action was required from heads of states. And I'm not sure how many of you noticed that the countries that have responded phenomenally well to COVID are those that are led by women, which were New Zealand, Denmark, Finland, Taiwan, Germany, and Norway. So our feminine skills of inclusion, relational intelligence, deep listening, empathy, intuition, big picture thinking, finding common ground, and bridge building have been what is required to successfully deal with this crisis. So this that has been dismissed as soft skills are not soft at all, as they are complex to acquire and develop. And maybe let's agree that the soft skills have maybe turned out to be the new hard. And through these soft skills, profound social transformation is underway, replacing the unsustainable world of domination. And let's maybe also agree that there is something to be said about gender and crisis leadership. Whether that crisis is COVID or climate change or the unfortunate Ukraine invasion that we are currently facing as the world. I think let's submit and agree and acknowledge that female leaders at the helm of these situations have stood up to be counted in a very remarkable way. And I really must say that I've been in awe watching Olena Zelenska, the wife of Ukrainian president, who has taken on the first lady of a country at war. She has declined the safe passage her and her family have been offered by the US, and she has insisted on staying in Ukraine. And in response to all of this, she says, open quote, "Today I will not panic or shed tears. I will be calm and confident. My kids are watching me, and I will stand by them by the side of my husband and together with you, the people of Ukraine," close quote. Now, if this is not leadership, then I don't know what is. And yet we still, as women, receive messages around us that continue to tell us that we are not able, that we are not skilled, that we are not independent, that we are not leadership worthy, and that we are not capable of managing careers and positions that require bravery and strength. Colleagues, I'm talking about gender equality for a sustainable tomorrow. And supporting women's leadership is one of the calls by the UN Women on this International Women's Day. And in relation to climate change, they say that in general, women are more likely to consider their families and communities in decision-making processes, which is crucial to producing the kind of holistic solutions that make for effective climate action. You see, it may be argued that women do not make better leaders, and that's okay. But the point here is not whether we make better leaders or we make different leaders. I think the point we are trying to make is that the need for women to be at the helm, especially during this crisis, is that women make better leaders. Because for you to be successful, you must be a leader of your time. You need to be what your country or your company needs you to be at that time. Command and control leadership is dead. We live in an age that demands cooperation and collaboration, and the crises we are facing as the world have proven that. A time where the carrot is more powerful than the stick. A time well suited for a woman's unique brand of leadership. And don't get me wrong, it is not that men cannot display these qualities. It is rather that women tend to do so with more ease, confidence, and comfort. You know, the times we are confronting at the moment demand that we recognize that leadership is about an appreciation that you lead a complex and interconnected system that you alone cannot resolve. It's about holding various and even competing ideas and perspectives in your mind. It is about listening to, considering, and extracting value from diverse viewpoints. It is about learning that you share more similarities with your so-called enemies than differences. So your role, therefore, as a leader is is to, yes, have a point of view to start a discussion, but you have an obligation to hear everyone's voice and get everyone involved. So consensus building becomes critical, as is decisiveness, agility, and taking action. You know, one of the early lessons that I got when I started my leadership journey was the importance of being decisive, not to be a fence sitter, to choose a side, to take a position, even when you are critical inside about the decision that you are making, especially in a crisis situation where people look up to leaders to give direction. And the truth of the matter is that as the leader, you don't always have the answers. You see, the prime ministers that I referred to earlier on, Jacinda Ardern, Matt Fredrickson, Sanna Marin, Tsai Ing-wen, Angela Merkel, and Anna Solberg did not have the answers when they made those nimble decisions for their countries at the beginning of COVID. And I have no doubt that Olena Zelenska also doesn't have the answers. But you see, it's okay, because leadership is not about having answers. It is rather about being decisive. You see, when you are a leader, you cannot cry with your colleagues, because when the general is in the trenches, then the battle is lost. The demand at the time is for you to be what your country or your company needs you to be at that time, because by definition, leadership is agile. It is about showing up. And sometimes you realize that the only thing you have going for you is trusting the confidence that others have in you. I once read somewhere that I would rather have a leader that is strong and wrong rather than a leader that is weak and right. So leading in a crisis situation and in uncertain times requires that you evaluate the facts in front of you and make a decision. And remember, it's a crisis situation. You don't have all the time in the world, so you cannot respond as you would in a routine emergency by following plans that have been drawn up in advance. A crisis is ruled by unfamiliarity and uncertainty. You are facing a situation that is unknown, and therefore a predefined response plan cannot be a solution. Colin Powell, who is the former US Secretary of State, talks about the 40-70 rule of decision making. He says, never make a decision with less than 40% of the information you are likely to get, and gather no more than 70% of the information available. Anything less than 40% you are guessing, and anything more than 70% you are stalling. And stalling is definitely not what these women leaders have done. Colleagues, I'm still talking about the UN Women's Call for supporting women leadership under the theme Gender Equality for a Sustainable Tomorrow. And coming back home to look at what confronts us as a business sector in particular, I came across very interesting data that was shared by Accenture last year, which revealed that in South Africa, women account for little more than 10% of the top leadership positions of organizations, which is mainly the CEO positions and the chairperson positions. It says less women participate in the labor force, and they are paid almost 1/3 less than men, and that the current gender pay gap between men and women won't close for a projected 217 years. For a projected 217 years, the gender gap will not close, or the gender pay gap will not close. The study also says that 2/3 of people who lost their livelihoods during the first quarter of the lockdown, when we started COVID in March 2020, were women. This is happening, colleagues, in an environment where 52% of the population are women and where 45% of the households are women-led. You see, it cannot be right that poverty still has a female face, because this exacerbates not just the gender inequality, but it exacerbates the broader social inequality. And this is where the sustainability piece in the UN Women's theme this year becomes important. You see, business has a responsibility to draw strategic connections between sustainability and social inequality by evaluating how business can contribute to reducing or eliminating humanity's most pressing challenges, and defining the metrics for evaluating successful socially innovative initiatives. We need to find ways as business and learn how sustainability supports economic success and how it fits into an overall competitive business strategy. You see, unfortunately for us as business, sustainability is no longer an option. Our customers are demanding it, our employees are demanding it, and investors are pushing hard for organizations to dedicate resources to making a positive contribution to society in line with the UN's 17 SDGs. I think as business, we need to appreciate that the times we operate in demand a reinvention of our businesses as sustainable organizations, which require that we cultivate our mindset to create lasting change. We are being called upon to identify the connections between business and social responsibility and therefore re-evaluate our organization's sustainability-related metrics. The 2020 World Economic Forum also calls for this notion of stakeholder capitalism versus shareholder capitalism. So as we ring the bell for gender equality this morning to heed the UN Women's Call, I would like to submit that business, as the only social partner with disproportionate resources and therefore a disproportionate voice, has a critical role to play in this regard to achieve the sustainable development goals, which seek to balance social, economic, and environmental sustainability through ending poverty, hunger, AIDS, and discrimination against women and girls. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting IFC to participate at this year's virtual bell ringing ceremony to raise awareness around gender equality in South Africa. IFC has long been engaged in efforts at the capital market level to support women as economic actors. This work includes women in leadership, capacity building, support to regulators on integrating gender indicators into corporate governance codes, and co-sponsoring annual Ring the Bell for Gender Equality activities, and that in conjunction with International Women's Day. Gender inequality remains stubbornly high across all Africa. Women across the continent face greater challenges accessing finance, job, or asset, and that compared to men. They all suffer from gender-biased violence, particularly so here in South Africa. COVID-19 has exacerbated these challenges. In sub-Saharan Africa, women-led smaller businesses were hit the hardest. Many of these businesses suffered huge financial losses, or they were forced to shut operation completely. IFC believes that working toward gender equality is the right thing to do. Gender equality improves women's life and hence the lives of families and children, reduces poverty, and contributes to shared prosperity. We are helping to raise awareness and address barriers that impede women-owned businesses, such as access to finance. We create opportunities to provide more affordable finance, capacity building to enhance financial literacy and access to supply chains and market for women-led businesses. For example, IFC's Banking on Women program invested over $283 million in financial institutions to lend to women-led SMEs, and these through 29 transactions in Africa. The program also focuses on providing advisory services to emerging market financial institutions to enhance capacity to better serve women and women-led businesses. In South Africa, IFC is pleased to support GSE's leadership in developing disclosure guidance for local companies on sustainability and climate aspects. The proposed guidance highlights gender diversity at board level and gender equity in employment, skills development, and earning a living wage, which we all know through IFC research help businesses to outperform financially. By joining with others today at the Ring the Bell for Gender Equality on International Women's Day, we are creating even greater awareness of the challenges women face, but also of the real progress they are making. Thank you very much.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Globally, women hold only 19.7% of board seats, only 15.7% of CFO positions, only 6.7% of board chair positions, and only 5% of CEO positions. Eliminating discrimination against female workers could boost productivity by up to 40%, because equality means business. So far, many stock exchanges have already advanced gender equality and the UN Sustainable Development Goals by promoting access to finance for women and encouraging women to invest in public markets, developing new products such as sustainability-linked bonds with gender criteria, signing and adopting the Women's Empowerment Principles, and promoting gender equality listing criteria and gender data disclosure. Ring the bell for gender equality.
Hi again, everybody, and welcome back after our countdown and our market open. I hope you're all actively trading on the market and pushing up our stocks today. So after that fantastic keynote by Busi Mavuso, there isn't that much left to be said. Busi, you have given us an absolute goldmine of information and an understanding of what those challenges are. And I think the biggest takeaway for me from listening to Busi was when she says that this is a time well suited for a woman's unique brand of leadership. And without further ado, I want to hand you over to the JSE's Chief Risk Officer, Nicola Caminos, who will take you through a panel discussion that we're going to have with a lineup of amazing women, including Nompilo Marafo, who's the Chief Sustainability and Corporate Affairs Officer at MTN, Nomfundo Makaya, who's the Human Capital Executive at RMB, and Michelle Knott, the Co-Chairperson of Women in ETFs South Africa. Nicola, I hand over to you. I'm sure you have a fantastic discussion lined up for us. We can't wait to hear.
Great. Thanks so much, Shamila, and good morning, everyone, and happy International Women's Day. I think each and every one of us should really just be proud of, firstly, the positions we currently occupy, and celebrate those women that have come before us that have really helped us open the doors, and also just encourage ourselves to do exactly that for the next generations. So it really is my honor and privilege to be hosting a panel discussion this morning on International Women's Day. It's the 8th one that we're hosting at the JSE, Ring the Bell for Gender Equality. And really very proud of doing this with over 100 exchanges all over the world, and in partnership with the World Federation of Exchanges. As we've mentioned, you saw earlier in the program today some comments from the IFC in partnership with the Motsepe Foundation, and I'm very privileged to have one of the colleagues from RMB on this panel, who's also one of our sponsors and partners. And then we've partnered with the Sustainable Stock Exchanges, UN Women, UN Global Compact, and then the last but not least, Women in ETFs and CFA Society South Africa, both of those organizations being represented by Michelle as well, who is one of the panelists. So really just a wonderful occasion for all of us to celebrate Women's Day, and make sure that we focus on that theme of ensuring gender equality today, which will really help us to unlock a more sustainable tomorrow, which is a really juicy discussion. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce my panelists. I'm going to start with Nompilo, and I'm just going to give a sec for all of you on the screen. Great, there we go. So Nompilo is similar to Shamila, the Chief Sustainability and Corporate Affairs Officer. So really have a lovely, diverse panel. Nompilo representing from a sustainability side. Nomfundo is the Human Capital Executive at RMB. So she's got her HR hat on today. And Michelle North is the, as I've mentioned, the co-chair of Women in ETF South Africa with myself. But she's essentially in a client executive role at CoreShares, which is an investment management company in South Africa. So just a little bit about my panelists before we kick off the discussion. Nompilo has really had a very rich career with over 20 years in different industries, including the financial services sector, mining, oil and gas, and now telecommunications. And I think she has really some wonderful insights she can share with us, specifically talking about the creation of shared value and the integration of environmental, social, and governance practices, and all the great work that she's done specifically in the MTN group around sustainability, corporate communication, and stakeholder engagement, specifically focused on some of the MTN foundations. So look forward to hearing from Nompilo. And then Nomfundo, as I've mentioned, has the HR hat on today, a human capital executive at RMB, who's also got a very impressive over 26 years experience in the financial services sector in various areas, 3 of those being short-term insurance, banking sector, specifically at First Rand. And really one of the things that she's exceptionally passionate about is making sure that she grows people in the organization for a long-term sustainability of any business. So I think she'll be able to add a lot of food for thought there in terms of how you build your caliber within your organization to ensure your long-term sustainability as an organization. So that is really exciting. And then last but definitely not least, Michelle North, as I've mentioned, representing both the CFA South Africa Society as well as Women in ETFs. It's both of those are global organizations, but we have chapters in South Africa, and also very passionate about servicing her clients, creating cost-effective investment solutions, and then in her personal time also very passionate about female empowerment with some of the initiatives that she's involved in. Over 15 years of experience in financial services sector, as I've mentioned, currently working for CoreShares investment managers as their client executive. But in her past life, having spent over 10 years in London, really working at some of the big ETF houses there and building up some of the ETF sales capabilities. So let me leave it there. So we've got a lovely, rich, diverse panel, as I've mentioned, with some insights from a human capital side, insights from a sustainability side, and then also insights from a client exec side. So ladies, let me start with you, Nompilo. Maybe you can share a little bit with us in terms of why you believe it's so important for business to drive gender equality. You know, what sits at the bottom of wanting to actually do this and has driven you in your career to sit in the role that you're in and do the work that you do?
Thanks, Nicola, and thank you so much for inviting me to this panel and also inviting MTN to share a bit of what we're doing. Personally, the theme that has been brought forward by the UN Women resonates with me as a Chief Sustainability Officer for MTN. I must be honest, I looked around to look at how many other females in South Africa particularly are sustainability officers, and I found very few. So in that on its own is something that we really need to think about in terms of how we can make sure that sustainability is part and parcel of what we do, and also make sure that females leaders are also part of sustainability as we move forward. It's such a new area, ESG, but we're not seeing a lot of inclusion of women in that field by itself. So that was one thing that I thought I would get off my chest as we start this conversation. Why do I think this is important and it's business imperative to do? I think it's well documented. McKinsey has written a study around about $200 trillion that could be included in global economies by just including women to participate more. We have read about the profitability that can improve by including women more in the global economies. There's a lot of studies that are flying out there that we are all aware of. There's a lot of UN women input into them, but we're just not making enough progress as we should. If we knew what we know now, by now we should have done better, right? But we are not. So if you look at communities, and I will just delve into what Nicola asked, that what drives me and why am I in this career? Because I believe that I'm not in this career by mistake. It's my purpose and it's my passion. It's something that I love doing. I look at communities where we all come from. I look at community and societies where we were all raised, different levels. And what I've realized about women is that in all spheres of development, you find a woman. In all spheres of societies where there's a challenge and there's a crisis, you find a woman. So therefore, I always imagine a future where we could include more female energy, more female innovation, more female entrepreneurship in what we do in order to diversify what organizations do. Because we bring a different skill. I think Mama Mavuso put it very well by saying that the diversity of thought and the diversity of personality and the diversity of how women look at things differently complements what men do. It's not saying that we're getting rid of what men leaders have done. It's about complementing skills. So from that perspective, I think with all the knowledge and all the literature that's there that we've all read in terms of why this is business imperative, we are beginning to see the value of it. We're beginning to see the value of having women leaders running companies or female leaders running countries. And we're seeing that they approach challenges and they approach opportunities differently to men, which complements what has been happening all along. So it's something that I'm very passionate about. And lucky for me, I work for an organization that takes this equally seriously. And it's something that I will share later in the conversation.
Great, thank you so much, Nompilo. Can I maybe ask you just to mute your mic while the others are speaking? So thanks so much, really lovely insights. And I think you're just reminding me of the concept of cognitive diversity, which really talks to the fact that you want to make sure that you've got enough variety of voices around the table and in the room so that you can get those real pearls of wisdom and insights from different perspectives, different backgrounds, not just in terms of race and gender, but also potentially culturally and just generally work experience as well, which is really a lovely concept. And for me, it just touches on one of those top risks that have been highlighted in the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report that was published earlier this year that Shamila mentioned in her intro, which is social cohesion erosion. And we've seen that with obviously the war essentially breaking out with Russia invading the Ukraine and where the families are left there. So important for us as women to step in with the way that we lead in a different way to make sure that we can plug that gap of social cohesion being eroded. And Nomfundo, with that introduction, I want to move to you because I think there's something very exciting that you can potentially share with us, given that similar to MTN and what Nompilo spoke about, that you guys are also signatories of the Women Empowerment Principles, and specifically the work that you're doing in your employee activism space to ensure that your employee value proposition is appropriate, and your project that you call very aptly Athena, which is really a Greek goddess, which I think is so important for us to make sure that we can leverage off that concept and other projects like this to start changing the global narrative and, as I've said, really address that social cohesion being eroded. Nomfundo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Happy International Women's Day to you, to my fellow panelists, and to all the women joining us online. It's wonderful to be here. So Nicola, I mean, our signatory status to the United Nations WEPs, which we call that for short, Women Empowerment Principles, has been a very exciting development for us. So we signed up in 2020. And the reason why we did that is because
Nomfunda, I don't know if it's just me, I've lost your sound.
Can you hear me now, Nicola?
Yes, there we go. Thank you.
So
we heard you signed up in 2020.
Yes, we signed up in 2020. And the reason why we signed up is, firstly, we wanted to have access to like-minded organizations who are progressive thinkers in this space, who share our vision and a passion for this topic, so that we can learn from each other and co-create solutions together. And secondly, the UN Women Empowerment Principles offer guidance to organizations on how to promote gender equality and women empowerment in the workplace, in the marketplace, and in the community. So we felt that it was important for us then to be part of that movement. The main signatory here is not even human capital or employee organizations, but it's actually the CEO. And the CEO then commits to this agenda at the highest level of the organization, which for us is quite important. What also happens is that he collaborates with multiple stakeholders to ensure that we foster an environment that empowers women and that has progressive business practices. There are several principles that we've signed up for. There are 6 of them, and some which have come up in the content that's already been covered. Essentially, it's about ensuring that leaders at the most senior leadership walk the talk when it comes to this topic. It is about ensuring that our supply chain and marketing practices are gender responsive, as well as ensuring the fair treatment of women and on issues such as, zero tolerance on sexual harassment, and as well as ensuring that issues like gender-based violence are addressed openly and support provided in the workplace. Now, the other topic that you've asked me about, Nicola, I'm very excited, to talk about the subject of employee activism, which is a very important part of our employee value proposition. I read an article recently from MIT Sloan, which also Brené Brown quotes in one of her latest podcasts, which talks about the growth of and the importance of employee activism in influencing organizational culture. We really take advantage of this. We've got several employee affinity groups in RMB. And the reason for this is we recognize that, as Busi said earlier, we need all hands on deck when it comes to this topic. And, there's a lot that needs to be done, and none of us can do it alone. So what we aim to do is to empower employees, and we partner them, and we sponsor and we fund and we encourage them to drive some of our key strategies and initiatives in the organization. One of those is definitely Athena, our movement that was formed in 2015. So it's been a while. So it's quite a mature organization, and it was formed by a group of very passionate women who wanted to make a difference and to ensure that they made a positive contribution towards gender equality and women empowerment. Athena is made up of both women and men, and their slogan actually is men and women for gender equality. So it's very important to acknowledge the fact that men matter in this discussion. And yes, Athena is the goddess of wisdom, and the name weaves together strength and vulnerability, creativity and passion, discipline and intellect and imagination. So what we really want to do with Athena is to embrace the value that both feminine and masculine qualities bring to any organization. And we also believe strongly that women do not need to leave behind the deeper parts of themselves in order to thrive in a male-dominated world. We do have also an employee movement, which we call Aperture, that gives employees a voice in how we are transforming the workplace across the various categories, including race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, language, and so on and so on. And very proud of a subset of Aperture, which we call Origin Lambda, which is about our LGBTQIA movement, which proudly has just won a bronze medal in our first participation in SAWEI, which is the South African Workplace Equality Index. And it is the only LGBTQIA inclusion benchmark on the African continent. And what this does, it just ensures that also we hear the voices of so-called minorities in the workplace, and that we encourage others who are allies, supporters, and partners to this community to be part of this movement. Thank you very much, Nicola.
Great, thank you so much, Nomfunda. I was struggling there with my unmute button. You've shared so much wisdom. I think it's really amazing what you guys are doing at RMB. It's really wonderful to hear from companies that are listed on the exchange, MTN and RMB, in terms of the great work that you're doing in this space and setting examples and leading by example. And so just before I hand over to Michelle to give us some intro from her side, I thought it's so interesting to just observe that you've mentioned that obviously your CEO himself is the signatory and he's a guy. So just by the way, the JSE CEO very proudly is a woman, and our previous CEO was also a woman. But as you mentioned, it's so important for both men and women to get together to make sure that we commit to gender diversity. And as I introduce Michelle, who also has a male CEO, who really is a wonderful guy and has given us a lot of support in terms of the work we do at Women in ETFs and other organizations. I think it just really links in so nicely with the whole theme of Athena that you have at your organization, bringing in both men and women to ensure we've got gender equality. Because the reality is it can't just be a conversation of just women around the table. We won't have that sort of cognitive diversity then. We really have to partner in this regard. So Michelle, I want to bring it a little bit closer to the work that you do and want to ask you why it's so important, specifically in the investment industry and potentially also for investment associations that you're involved in, such as Women in ETFs and CFA Society, to drive gender equality.
Thank you, Nicola. And yes, it is really a great honor to be here today, and wonderful that we have paused to focus on these issues. So of course, I think like many things in South Africa, we need private sector to be on board and to drive change. And the investment industry in particular is very cognizant of these issues. And you know, the CFA Society has been doing a wonderful job of trying to attract more women to doing the qualification and to the sector in particular. I think in general, we know that women are much less empowered in terms of their own finances. So, I mean, people have mentioned today, women globally are getting paid 77 cents to the dollar for doing the same work as men. In general, supporting a lot more family members off that lower wage and doing you know, a much greater share of the unpaid childcare and domestic duties. So, you know, as an investments industry, we need to focus on what we can do to help empower women take care of their own finances and become more financially literate, but also, of course, lead by example and promote women within the ranks within our organizations. And coming back to Women in ETFs, that's specifically one of the goals that the global body was founded on, being to inspire, connect, and support. And so really just, you know, between organizations like the CFA Society, which are about attracting people into the industry with the relevant qualifications, and then organizations like Women in ETF, which are, you know, to help connect people and keep them in the career, keep them climbing the ladder and getting to the places where they want to be, together with of course the individual companies, as you say, like Core Shares is very supportive of the initiative. Many other investment businesses are, and you need that to come organically and to be a genuine commitment that we want to support diversity. And this is something that you mentioned as well, of course, the concept of cognitive diversity. When we have more perspectives and more ideas around the table to solve complex problems, we're going to get better solutions. And this is everything from running a business through to solving climate change.
Great, thanks so much, Michelle. And I think just as you spoke about financial empowerment, it just really triggered my thoughts in terms of also being empowered from a connectivity perspective, obviously also being encouraged and given the right level of support to go up the ranks within your organization, having sponsorship, etc. So if I take it back to MTN and specifically Nompilo, just looking at, you spoke a little bit earlier about being a signatory for the Women Empowerment Principles. How is MTN strategically prioritizing gender equality at the workplace and potentially within your community and for your clients? Similar to sort of concept that Michelle was talking about of there's different ways of looking at empowerment and gender equality. It's also about financial literacy to make sure we've got a more sustainable tomorrow. So what are the things that MTN is looking at to make sure that we've got gender equality for a more sustainable tomorrow?
Thanks, Nicola. I think for MTN, one thing that we've done in 2022 is that you'll see that diversity and inclusion as a theme is now a KPI that's linked into our LTIs for all executives. This is something that we only have 3 that's linked, and diversity and inclusion is one of them. The reason why we did that is because if you look at sustainability and you look at where organizations are going, you really need to pay attention in terms of what will really change the dial. So many companies, including ourselves, we have a lot of initiatives that look at diversity and inclusion, that looks at gender equality, etc. But like we started the conversation by saying that there's a reason why these things are not moving as fast. So what we're trying to do is to accelerate our progress as much as possible. So you'll see that we also have put targets that says by 2030, we want to reach 50% of women in the workforce at MTN. Now, that's a big, audacious challenge that we've put on ourselves. But the reason why we do that is because we really, really want to see progress. We don't just want to have programs that are not producing the results that we want to see. So it's a KPI, it's measured. And one thing that we got from the UN Women Principles as a guideline was the importance of having measurable goals to make sure that you succeed. For that reason, also, we have a program we call the Rising Leaders. I'm proud to say I'm a product of it. So the Rising Leaders is when we put together young female leaders that are ready to succeed, to move to executive roles. So it's about making sure that you have a proper pipeline and a proper succession plan in place to advance the progress of women. I think I noted a lady in South Africa that said, I won't mention her name, but it really resonated with me what she said. She was going through an interview for a job. And then she said, it's not like we haven't been here. It's just that we haven't been given an opportunity to move forward. So from that perspective, the Rising Leaders puts women in that platform where they can be recognized, they can be seen, they are supported, so that when those opportunities come, you are ready to advance and move on. So I'm just mentioning the ones that we have really looked at in terms of how we can change in terms of our approach. If you look at our CSR and you look at how we work with communities, gender diversity is quite key. So we're making sure that we have coding for girls. We're making sure that we have programs around robotics for girls and for women in our society. We have a very big division where we look at mobile money and making sure that women are financially included in the communities where we work. So we have all those type of projects so that we're not only looking from an executive level, we're making sure that our societies as well benefit. MTN, we talk about a belief that we believe that everybody deserves the benefits of a modern connected life. So we're trying as much as possible that that belief is shared as much as possible with the communities where we operate as well. Because I think there's been a lot of discussion around communities and societies that if you look at entrepreneurship and you're looking at the topic of what we're talking about today, about a sustainable future and a sustainable tomorrow, we can't have a sustainable tomorrow where we have communities that we are not making sure that we're not leaving behind. So we need to find ways, I think, Nicola, to make sure that when we're looking at sustainability, we look at sustainability differently in terms of how do we include everybody? How do we look at climate change in a way that you involve women in the solutions of how they can come up with their own programs in their own communities to advance projects around water scarcity, around renewables, etc., recycling. So the concept of green jobs, we need to make sure that it really translates into the communities and the societies where we operate, so that we have this thing running at all levels of where we want to see progress. Otherwise, we leave everybody behind. So that's basically, in the nutshell, is the strategy of MTN. We're seeing a lot of value already. I think we're sitting at 38% in terms of women inclusion across the workforce. So we're quite confident that the 50% by 2030 is achievable, and we could do more.
Wow, Nompilo, I think that 50% really is a phenomenal target. I think you're just reminding me of the 30% club, which globally is trying to encourage at least 30% of women being participating at board level. And you're really taking that to another level, upping it to 50%. So kudos to you and all the best, and I hope you succeed. I really love the fact that you mentioned your Rising Leaders program, which you're a product of. I think a lot of those types of programs are so important, and certainly things we can learn from yourselves. And then your mobile money, in terms of linking it back to society, I think is so important. And I remember when you and I chatted offline about when we talk about sustainability and we talk about ESG, we often focus on the E quite heavily in terms of environmental elements. And it's so important to not miss out on the very big S in the middle, which really is something that's so prominent in South Africa, given that we've got such a high Gini coefficient and one of the most unequal societies in the world. So we really need to make sure from a societal perspective, like you said, partner with those communities so that they can themselves create green jobs. And given a lot of those communities are headed up by female, even child-headed households, a lot of women involved in those communities, they really can be and unlock a lot of those opportunities. And so I think, having spoken about empowerment and the beautiful program of Rising Leaders, I think it's a lovely segue into Nomfundo, talking about the great work that you're also doing in terms of prioritizing gender equality, women's succession planning, specifically with your HR hat on, and then also some of the coaching type aspects that one can bring in, given that you're currently completing an executive coaching program. So that'll be some good insights. Thanks, Nomfundo.
Wonderful. Thanks, Nicola. So I think here, the most important thing for all of us is to ensure that all people policies, processes and practices are aligned to this gender equality and to the women empowerment aspirations. I think most of the time what happens in the workplace is that the intent is there, you know, the policies are there, the processes are there, but the question is how is the experience? And to what extent are those being translated into practices that people can touch and feel? And I think that's really what corporates are focusing on. And of course, to enable this, it's very important that there is a partnership between leadership, human capital, and employees, and where gaps are identified, to ensure that obviously there's feedback loops and action is taken to actually close those gaps. From an R&B perspective, we encourage and expect our leaders to actively sponsor people who don't look like them. You know, so we really do a lot of work on the ground to make sure that people who may ordinarily have been missed out on certain opportunities are actually identified and profiled and given opportunities. And Nombilo speaks of measurement. You know, this is something that we measure, and there is an expectation that our leaders walk the talk when it comes to this. We also ensure that we measure the diversity of our succession pools to ensure that there's sufficient gender cover. And from a coaching perspective, we really embrace coaching as a way to unlock potential, to create self-awareness, and to just really provide guidance through the various career and life stages in the world of work. There's individual coaching that is available to anyone and everyone who has identified a need. There's group coaching, there's coaching for teams in our leadership development programs, and a fairly new offering, which is what we call parental coaching, which we offer to both moms and dads who are either expecting children or have just had children. And you know, there is a kind of a milestones that we identify for them as I said, they go on either maternity leave or just before they come back from the maternity, they come back into the workplace, as well as a couple of months after they have returned. So we really see coaching as a powerful tool which enables growth and stretch. And of course, our women have embraced this, and we also have a lot of them. In fact, the majority of our coaches also at RMB are women, because we have invested in this, in growing this capability internally. Thanks, Nicola.
Great, thanks, Nomfundo. That really is an awesome initiative. I have to admit, it really is impressive. And I wouldn't be a proudly JSE employee if I wouldn't mention that we have gender neutral maternity leave, which really is something that one of our HR executives, our previous HR executive, who was a guy, by the way, just blowing his horn, actually introduced, which was really great to make sure that we reshape some of those societal norms and balance the roles of male and female, even within the households. Because if we're expecting all of us to lead within our various streams, whether we're male or female, then we all need to carry our workloads at home equally as well. So Michelle, this reminds me of something you and I actually spoke about when we were discussing this topic of really making sure that we've got gender equality in terms of a more sustainable tomorrow. And we spoke about those types of elements in terms of how the societal norms should be reshaped to make sure that you really foster gender equality in the investment industry, but also just broadly in societies. And so, Michelle, if you'd like to touch on a bit of that and any other thoughts you've got that links to that concept, that'll be great. Thanks.
Thanks, Nicola. And it's great to hear your story about the JSE, parental leave, and about, RMB offering parental coaching for, moms and dads. And I think, it's been mentioned several times today about women doing, the lion's share of the domestic duties and the childcare. And I think, men also need equality in the home, and I think it's both in terms of them, picking up their share, but also being encouraged to do their share. I mean, physically, the fact that women, give birth and then breastfeed for a few months certainly doesn't mean for the rest of that 18 years the child lives with you. Mum is the default parent, and then that is what we tend to have in all levels of society. Mom is reading all the emails from the school and arranging the play dates and arranging the teacher's presence. And why don't we have dads that are the parent rep at schools? I'd love to see that. And it must be particularly tough for divorced dads or single dads to feel involved in what's going on with their children at school. So I think, by the same token as saying we want to have equality for women in the workplace, we also want to have equality for men in the domestic arena. And I think we have to, be cognizant of that and make a bigger effort around that. I often think of the Nordics being so progressive in this regard. They had, I remember, being so impressed when I landed in one of the airports, and they had a male bathroom with nappy change facilities. They have the shared parental leave, so you can have 1 year off when you have a child, but it can be divided between the parents. So if you choose to do 6 months mom and 6 months dad, that's up to you, or 9 months, 3 months, or whatever the case may be, which is incredibly progressive. And perhaps South Africa financially, we're not in a position to offer as much a paternity leave. I think we can certainly identify that as a place we'd like to get to.
Great, thank you, Michelle. And then maybe just quickly, I know some of the work that CFA Society is doing specifically on the gender equality space is just making sure that they make more bursaries available to some women. And women in ETFs have multiple mentorship programs launched across the world. And I know both of those institutions, obviously similar to the Athena project that Nomfundo spoke about at RMB, is they really want to encourage both men and women to join in those elements. And so women in ETFs, even though the name says woman, is really open to women and men. And I know in the mentorship programs, we've encouraged both to participate. So maybe you want to just talk a little bit about those societies as well.
No, thanks, Nicola. Absolutely. Firstly, on the CFA side, they have bursaries for women specifically who are eligible and in a qualifying role, and so that they have some financial support to encourage them to do their qualification, which is fantastic. At Women in ETF, we've got a number of initiatives. You mentioned the mentorship. So last year in South Africa, we had 22 pairs. We did have male mentors as well. So of course, we've touched on this today as well, but we need men and women to be supportive of gender equality. And then we also have a university outreach program where we've got lots of, very diverse range of wonderful women on our committee. And we've had some sessions with various universities around the country, ranging from all kinds of topics, the introduction to ETFs and the industry, what different types of careers are, within the ETF ecosystem, but also just general career advice and, how to get started. Perhaps it's not, maybe when you graduate, you can't find the perfect job, but you find something that gives you an opportunity to learn, to network, and to meet people that can help guide you in the direction that you're trying to go. And so by having these, diverse range of ladies talking to young students, I think that, shows role models. It shows that you can have a career in investments or in the ETFs, which perhaps some young ladies may not have considered. And I think it's very key to acknowledge that we can't expect to have 50% or 30% at board level being female if we're not getting, those sort of numbers in the graduate intakes, starting out in the industry. So the one question is, how do we attract, a lot of female talent to the industry, and then, secondly, retain and nurture and guide them into those leadership positions. Another spoke to this wheel, so to speak, is that at Women in ETF, we've been thinking a lot about how, in South Africa in particular, compared to the rest of our, global body, we are so cognizant of helping young ladies at grassroots level. And so we've identified 2 charities that we are working with. One is called Dignity Dreams, and they go around underprivileged schools and provide washable sanitary pads to young ladies who often, if they can't afford sanitary products, will actually spend a week every month sitting at home and not going to school. So over their whole teenage years, that's 25% less access to valuable time in school than their male counterparts. So just such a simple solve. They're also providing sex education, which is not provided in a lot of these schools. So a lot of the teenage pregnancies in South Africa are going to young ladies who don't even know how they, where that came from or how it happened to them. So, just such simple grassroots problems that need to be solved to ensure that we have women getting an education that's equal to men. And a second charity that we've identified is called Great Girls. And they work with young ladies in underprivileged areas in Cape Town and help them to, once they finish school, to choose an appropriate, further training or tertiary education, help them with access to finding bursaries or finding something appropriate that fits the financing they have available. And then further than that, helps them with writing CVs. If they're going for their first interview, what do you wear? If you come from a family where nobody has worked in a corporate environment and you're going for your first interview, that's quite an intimidating thing to find, the right outfit for the interview. And these are very simple sort of grassroots problems that are easy to solve, when we have a community helping. So yeah, these are wonderful charities, Dignity Dreams and Great Girls. So if any corporates are looking for charities to sponsor on International Women's Day or even our own Women's Day in August, these are very happy to put you in touch.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, and I think that's so important. And I think all these organizations you've mentioned, Women in ETF, CFA Society, Dignity Dreams, Great Girls, are all nonprofit organizations. And I think I'm just being reminded of the survey that's recently come out that just talks to corporates being trusted, the Edelman Trust Barometer, which talks about just governments not being trusted, the CEOs being trusted, and NGOs being trusted. And so I think it's a great opportunity, Nompilo, Nomfundo, for yourselves and your CEOs to partner to make sure that we step together from a gender equality perspective to make a real difference on the sustainability front. And also, Michelle, like you've mentioned, to partner with these types of NGOs that really can make a meaningful difference at the grassroots level. And that's really some lovely appeals that we left with and some food for thought. I want to just give an opportunity quickly to Nomfundo and then Nompilo to just give your closing remarks, any other points you wanted to raise, to just make sure that we close off this conversation around making sure that we build a more sustainable future through being very aware of and cognizantly ensuring gender equality. So Nomfundo, I'll ask you, and then we'll end off with you, Nompilo.
Thanks very much, Nicola. So, I quite like some of the themes that Michelle covered, because really the sustainability aspect of this conversation is all about what we are doing to equip young girls and young ladies as they grow and they come up the ranks. It's easy to complain as corporates, that we're not finding sufficient talent. But actually, if you look at some of the research that has been done around the number of girls who actually go through schooling and the kind of results they obtained in high school, you actually realize that there is something that we can do to turn the trajectory of this conversation. So, a lot more corporates, I think, need to join in this work that Michelle was talking about. We do partner, schools and tertiary institutions to start to plant that seed around, how students and learners actually choose subjects. We work a lot with grade 10s, grade 11s, grade 12s, and into university, so that we can, start to influence and to educate, the young ladies about future careers and the importance of the choices that they make while they are still young. And also there are summits that we get involved in. We've got the Rodin Girls Leadership Summit, which is open to the public and attracts girls from across society as well as an the international community. And that is really about ensuring that we plant that seed of a vision, courage, and to influence girls to just dream big about the future and to start to drive for positive change at that young age, because we think if we do that, the benefit then that flows in terms of the talent pipeline into not only corporates but into the broader society, we think that will go a long way. That's a very much needed investment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nompilo, I'll leave you to give us our closing remarks. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. I think for MTN, our shared value proposition, we call it ESG, is at the core of our business. So the discussion around diversity and inclusion is really at the core of what we do. In my role and being a member and an employee of MTN, the biggest challenge that I've seen is the one of communicating this to stakeholders, especially employees that work for the organization, to buy into this and to realize the importance of it. So in parting, I would think that every one of us, we called upon a higher purpose in terms of making sure that the story of women and what we want to see in future, we are able to tell holistically to everyone to buy into and to ensure that we see the results of what we want to see for the world going forward. Because for me, it's about what we also do as individuals, holding the organizations that we work for accountable and holding ourselves accountable to ensure that we're seeing the results of what we want our young girls and the women in the societies that we work with and in the executives that we are colleagues to succeed. So I like what has been spoken about supporting young girls in the communities as well, because we have to build leadership from the bottom up, and because otherwise we're not going to see the leaders that we want to see at the top if we're leaving everybody else behind. So that, thank you for that, and I think that's something that we need to look at in terms of collaboration.
Definitely, thank you so much, Nompilo. So I think the last point that I just wanted to quote that you said was really just making sure that we tap into that higher purpose and make sure that what we do in our various roles, you as a Chief Sustainability and Corporate Affairs Officer, Nomfundo as the Human Capital Executive, Michelle in her various roles that she performs as a client executive at CoreShares, but also the co-chair of Women in ETFs, that we all really affect the change and make sure that we focus on our higher purpose. Thank you so much, and I'll hand back to our MC, Shamila.
Thank you very much, ladies, for an exhilarating conversation this morning. I think to everybody on the line listening in, there were really some gems that we could take away from listening to all of you. Also so encouraging to see the leadership. For me, what was so noticeable was that in each of your programs and your initiatives, you have identified systemic and structural barriers that you are really trying to dismantle at the different levels. And that was really critical. It wasn't a hit and hope strategy. And I think that was critical to take away, is that you identified where those barriers lie, from Michelle giving us great pearls of wisdom, understanding early on about how to open up that pipeline and identify where that comes from, to within the different organizations. Nomfundo, Nompilo have given us views about how that's happened. And in each case, very, very dedicated, focused effort on what you're needing to do. I'm hoping that we will see a lot more of that coming through. And the future indeed does look bright if we do see that coming through. When I listened to Nomfundo, the thought that came to mind was that we should all be channeling our inner Athena. The definition he gave us of Athena and what that looks like, I think, was exceptionally motivating. And also to hear from you about no need to leave behind the deeper parts of yourselves to actually succeed in the work environment. And that is a perception, I think, that has been dominating for many, many years now, that, you kind of have a work persona as a woman and you work within this, and that actually outside you're somebody else. And what we're seeing is really that diversity of thinking that is bringing together and actually making our workplaces more successful. And that was great. Nompilo, the proper pipeline and succession planning, identifying young female leaders, And starting very early on the agenda and giving them that support, I think, was hugely, hugely helpful and hopefully a great takeaway for many people on the line. Michelle, so many things that you talked about, just looking at financial services and the barriers and identifying there. But even those things that you can't tackle directly with your business model and your practices, you're dealing with outside of that, right? With the programs that you support more from a CSI perspective, but that those programs themselves also identify the systemic and structural barriers that young women face. So thank you for that, ladies. Really insightful. And then without further ado, last but certainly not least, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Precious Moloi Motsepe, the CEO and founder of the Motsepe Foundation, to do our closing remarks. And so that's goodbye from me until we meet again next year. Precious, we hand over to you. Thank you.
I'm so glad of this opportunity to make the closing remarks for this important event. Thank you to the JSC, in particular, Dr. Leila Fourie, for this important collaboration and the support from business and NGOs. Gender equality has always been a theme that I have held dearly. And now, more than ever, we need decisive, coherent action from all stakeholders to achieve it. Over the last decades, important progress has been made in advancing the social and economic inclusion of women in many countries. Even before COVID struck, however, there were important areas where gender inequality and exclusion remained. And the pandemic has disproportionately impacted women and has reversed many of the important gains that were made. Indeed, I think the pandemic has revealed that gendered vulnerability is still a key inclusion-related challenge of our time. And yet, for a number of reasons, the present may be exactly the right time, not only to regain lost ground, but to move finally and decisively towards full gender equality. Firstly, developed and developing economies are being shown to lack resilience, to be structurally unsustainable, in part because they have not prioritized inclusion or faced up to the diversity of their societies adequately. Secondly, beyond recognizing that non-inclusionary societies are not resilient enough, there is growing recognition that diversity drives innovation. Both technological and social innovation require diversity of views and experience. Affect large corporations, for example, increasingly recognize. Thirdly, without inclusion, trust is very hard to maintain, and without trust, cooperation does not occur. And without cooperation, shared prosperity is not possible. Finally, although the fourth industrial revolution potentially brings serious challenges, digital technologies can help societies leapfrog to gender equality by improving access to education and entrepreneurial opportunity, by network and mentoring support, and by agricultural and social innovation that can reach effectively into non-urban areas. But we need to translate an abstract sense of opportunity into reality through prioritization, programming, partnerships, and resources. Events like today's, the ringing of the JSC bell for gender equality, and the important perspectives that have been shared build a sense of momentum and a shared sense of purpose. And this is really important. I thank you all for your participation. Thank you to the JSE for this, and I look forward to completing this journey with you, a journey to gender equality in South Africa and the whole world.